I'm sorry, I didn't want to lie to you in here.
That was beautiful. Are you going to say grace now?
I want to ask you about something, and it's personal.
We didn't have any dinner.
Oh, someone thinks a lot.
I have an idea for a television show.
It's derivative with a twist. That's what they're looking for. Well, I hate to sound remedial, but I haven't done this since I was in the Navy.
Let's have a conversation.
So, what does that mean?
Let's pretend we know what 1963 looks like.
Welcome to Mad Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015. We're gearing our conversation around the conversation the show is having about gender, the patriarchy, and our own personal Catholic guilt. With me, a Protestant, today, of course, he is currently trying to get some gum off his socks, so just give him a second. It's Will Ashton.
Hey, Catholic guilt. I cannot wait.
This is the one I've been waiting for.
Oh boy.
I have so many questions.
Sure. I mean, as a fairly lapsed Catholic, I don't know how much I can fill you in on the know-how of Catholic religion and Roman Catholicism, but I will do my very best.
My Catholic understanding, goes about as far as the movie Doubt and, Saving Sarah Silverman. Wait, what was it? Saving Silverman. That was it.
Saving Silverman?
Yeah, that's the one.
The Steve Zahn movie?
Yeah. Where he the girl next door becomes a nun.
Okay. That is a movie I saw once, maybe on Comedy Central. I would have to venture.
You sounded very skeptical of that reference. I don't know why. I mean, the plot of that character revolves around becoming a nun, but she falls in love with the guy, and okay, all right.
I mean, that's a movie I saw probably over 20 years ago. Once,
really?
I said.
I mean,
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I'd offend you by not keeping Sarah or Saving Silverman on the regular rotation.
Silverman.
Yeah. Sorry, not Sarah.
I mean, I've only seen it twice. It's not like I'm revisiting it.
Sure.
Anyway, Michael Verhulst, unfortunately, won't be here this week. He was served one too many cocktails by Sally Draper at work the other day, but we do miss him. And I'm sad because when Mike talks about Mad Men, I always get the sense that I'm the only person in the room. Do you get that sense, Will Ashton?
Yeah, I get that. Because I haven't watched this show before, and I'm on the episodes I haven't seen yet. So this is all new to me.
So you claim, I'm waiting for you to be like, hey, I misspoke earlier when I said that I hadn't seen this episode. I actually, did my dissertation on it. And
have I seen clips from this in the background at a party?
There it is.
Maybe.
Yep.
I don't remember anything from this episode vaguely, I remember Colin Hanks.
Okay.
In the show.
Colin Hanks. So this is season 2, episode 4. 3 Sundays. And this episode came out August 17th, 2008. It takes place in April 1962 for 3 Sundays. Tim Hunter directs, regular Mad Men director, and Andre Jacquemin and Maria Jacquemin, 2 regular writers of the show, are here as well. Last time they teamed up as sole credited writers. They did Nixon versus Kennedy with Lisa Albert, and they did Long Weekend with Bridget Bedard and Matthew Weiner. However, the last time they did a solo thing was Babylon, which was episode 6 of the last season, which Babylon, the F. Scott Fitzgerald thing, gets referenced in this episode. I like to think that that's a little thing they put in there on purpose, but it could just be a complete coincidence. But yeah, this is, I was telling you, Will, the episode of season 2 that I think it's the best episode. It's the only episode of this season that I really, really like. It's not to say that season 2 is unenjoyable or that it's not good at all. It's just this is the only episode where I'm this is really top tier Mad Men material. Now I'm ready to have my mind changed maybe, because there are episodes in this season like Jet Set and Mountain King that I do like.
Okay.
That I'm wondering if revisiting them, I'm going to like them a little bit more. Kind of curious how I'm going to deal with Gold Violin, for example, because that's one I've gone back and forth on actually. But I know all this is probably gibberish to you because you're let's stick to 3 Sundays. I'm making my way downtown, Faces Pass, and I'm homebound.
Sure.
Home being season 7.
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm a little bit more partial to, is it called Flight 31, the second episode?
Flight 1.
Sorry, Flight 1. I think that was a pretty tremendous episode, and I think that's one that has stuck with me.
I'm happy to hear that.
But you're not as keen on that one, I guess.
Not quite, but I mean, it's not even a bad episode or anything. In fact, I think Flight 1 would be my second favorite out of the 4 we've gone through so far. Benefactor being a tough one for me, but certainly has its strengths. I was going to bring this up before we talk about the episode proper. I looked up the ratings for these episodes again. I know we've kind of talked about this, I think, or we touched on it.
IMDb ratings, you mean?
No, the ratings of viewership.
Oh, okay. Ratings, like how many people watched. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I was looking at like the peak of last season, and we don't even have official ratings for every episode of last season, but for the episodes we do, the most popular episode, like the most highly watched rated episode, was Babylon last season, which shocking to me. I would have guessed The Wheel, but The Wheel was one of the lowest rated of last season, which I find fascinating. Like, I want to dig into it a little bit more to see why that probably is. It might have something to do, I think, with just the way that the season probably was marketed, and it kind of just like wound down a bit. But Nixon versus Kennedy, I don't even know what the rating is for that. I imagine it was probably a little high, but I don't know.
I do kind of wonder, because Kennedy versus Nixon is the one with the Mr. Campbell who cares, right?
Yes.
Do you think there were people who kind of tuned out when the mystery of, will Don be found out was, thrown away? Do you think some people could have been, taken out of the show because they were like invested in that being a crucial conflict, and they were just like, oh, well, I don't know. I mean, like, well, what's the investment now if that's not like kind of driving me episode by episode?
Yeah. Did they think that it was the finale, of like, that's it. That's a season.
Maybe.
Because it does feel like a finale. But and so I was looking at the ratings for season 2, and funny enough, for those who think young, the season 2 premiere had the second highest reported ratings of the whole show up until that point. So not quite as high as Babylon, but really close. And then it dips quite a bit into Flight 1, but still really high for the show. And then it dips again for the Benefactor, and it dips again for 3 Sundays. And it's gonna not dip again though, because the next episode is where it's gonna perk way back up. So I think it's a fun thing to track, to kind of go through memory lane, because I wasn't watching the show when it was coming out, right? Like in 2008. So I don't remember like what things were even like with how the show is talked about. Like Twitter was a thing, but like, there wasn't like any sort of like TV Twitter at the time. There wasn't really Black Twitter yet, I don't think, until like Scandal, at least like as we know it today, right?
Yeah, remember when Twitter was a thing? Oh boy.
Back in the day. But yeah, no, I don't know like how people talked about the show back then. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. I thought it was kind of interesting. But I guess let's talk about this episode.
Yeah, sure.
Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So as I kind of alluded before, this episode of Mad Men takes place over 3 Sundays. And it has like a bunch of like little stories attached to it. The 3 main ones, and I want to make sure I got this. So there's the Peggy story happening over 3 Sundays, obviously pretty big. There's the Dawn story, which is pretty big. The third one, I think you're supposed to assume it's Roger, right? Like that's the third one. I'm not missing anything.
Yeah, I mean, because certainly there's
small.
I was gonna say there's certainly not a lot of Pete this time around.
There's a lot of Pete's thighs,
legs. Yeah, I was gonna say you see a lot of Pete physically, but not
what will you do?
in terms of the character himself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Most of this episode is dedicated to Don and Peggy, and which it's very interesting because it reminds me a lot of Marriage of Figaro, kind of dipping into like a different kind of structure, hanging out with the characters on the weekend. We don't even go into Sterling Cooper for quite a bit, at first, because it's kind of, when it kicks off, you start to get the sense that, it's only going to be these 3 Sundays. But no, I mean, we break out to other days of the work week here and there. It's actually kind of interesting how the show isn't that clean, with it. Like, it's not trying to be super precious about like, well, we can't show what happens on Friday. It does. But what did you think of the structure? Did it work for you? In terms of like,
I was going to say, I mean, I feel like, and maybe this will change as the season goes along because I'm watching it anew and fresh. But I feel like the season in general has kind of primarily focused between Dawn and Peggy. They've been kind of the main characters throughout the season. The
show.
Sure, but I feel like more. I mean, because like with the first season, I feel like Peggy was certainly integral to the season, and we definitely got to see a lot of her upbringing in the office and her struggles. But I feel like it's been really crystallized as far as like her trying to find the work home balance. And certainly with her,
although we only got one
overbearing
scene of her
family. Yeah, so
we only got one scene of her last episode.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So maybe I am completely wrong.
And we're due for more Pete because we didn't get any Pete last week, and this week it's like we only got it was only skin deep. What we got Pete,
but I feel like perhaps at this point more than most other characters in the show, Peggy and Dawn are having clear identity crises and figuring out like how do they adapt to like a new generation, how they adapt to new adulthood, especially when there are forces that are kind of coming in that prevent them from really having a clean break between their work and home life. In that case, certainly with Peggy, it's like she has, mothered a child mostly unknowingly with Pete, a coworker, and it's not something that she can just kind of shoo away. The child is still in her life, albeit through her mother and her older sister, and she's not distant enough to where she has abandoned the child completely, but she doesn't really want to be a mother in the child's life. I mean, she kind of wants to kind of throw those responsibilities on to her family, but it's just so if not even physically, psychologically, that has been taking quite a toll on her, and certainly it seems her Catholicism kind of weighs that heavily. I mean, certainly guilt and sin play heavily into any Catholic's mindset, even a lapsed one like myself. So yeah, I mean, I find that stuff incredibly fascinating and something I really have enjoyed this season, this episode in particular. But yeah, I mean, I'm very curious to see where that goes from this point forward.
You've touched on, I think, something that is a big rubric for me when determining like a really great Mad Men episode versus a solid one. And when we're talking about good Mad Men episodes, I mean, we're talking about episodes of a show that are consistently much better than most shows out there. So, the curve is certainly out of whack. But the thing, and I know I've mentioned this a couple times on this podcast before, but the thing that I always look for in a great Mad Men episode is how the writing is going to fixate on one central theme, something that's like really focused, like maybe kind of like what Peggy says about the sermon. It's like, make it so that we understand, it's not in Latin. It's kind of a simple concept, but then it's able to layer that concept in through all of the characters it pays close attention to, while also introducing extra things into it that all coalesce. It all feels like it belongs together. Like you said, like identity crisis, you can take identity crisis and you can say that there's also like a crisis of faith. You can kind of like create a whole web of how all this stuff is weighing on not just Peggy, but how that relates to Dawn. My favorite Mad Men writing is when you can see something happening to Dawn, and then you can use that as context for what's happening to Peggy without seeing it happen to Peggy. That to me is like what makes the show uniquely brilliant, because not a lot of shows, I don't think, do it as well when they even attempt it. It's funny because the show, the show, you're not going to believe, you're going to think I'm a ridiculous person, but the show that actually kind of does this decently and is kind of, I think, one of the secrets behind why it was successful, even though it's a completely different show than this. You ready? Do you know what it is?
Thomas the Tank Engine?
Close.
Oh.
Thomas ate too much murder in that show.
VeggieTales?
Unfortunately for me, too violent. Scrubs.
Oh, Scrubs. Okay.
Scrubs is another example of a show that was able to do this pretty well. Well, not perfectly, but
sure.
Able to take all the
workplace series.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's the beauty of workplace shows, isn't it? Because like that's how we relate to our coworkers, by sort of how we're able to relate with each other in the workplace. It's such a great functionary place to like actually see characters thrive and face and deal with conflict. And yeah, so anyway, there's one central theme that I think really sticks out here. And I'm curious because you kind of mentioned before that what stuck out to you was sort of like Peggy being able to, or being unable to sort of, if you could, I want to make sure I got you right here, but you were saying something kind of along the lines of her being able to grapple with like the new changes.
Well, yeah, like, I mean, there are certainly in this episode it seems to be focusing a lot on characters who are sort of in that generational and cultural divide, like characters who, you know, in this case, like Don is someone who throughout this episode, he is kind of torn between like fathering his child, but not repeating the sins of his father. And that's certainly something that I think a lot of people can, you know, relate to, hopefully not in an abuse sense like that Don is dealing with here, but in the sense that, like, yeah, he is someone who has an undeniably weighted conscience, and someone who is trying to form his new identity, someone who has been burdened by his own sins of the past, and someone who's trying to kind of start anew, but is all undeniably carrying the sins of his past. But, you know,
there it is. Yeah. You hit it. Yeah. It's so the sins of the past, the resurrection, right? Tying into the religious themes of the episode, but also this is an episode about Don and Peggy not being able to deal with the past and how they're similar in that respect, right? So one thing that I think is great about this episode too is it ties back to season 1 a lot. It makes me think a lot of like the American Airlines pitch and the direction that he goes in with that pitch. It's like he has that whole thing where he comes out to the bullpen and is kind of like American Airlines, right? It's like it's not about like that happened to somebody else. It's not about the bomb. It's not about, he's trying to ignore the past and reinvent American Airlines as a new thing that is just like forget what happened before. That's what he does with his persona. That is the entire thesis of Don Draper as a human being. Forget about the past. Past didn't happen. You know, it'll amaze you how this didn't happen. And that is just like what he did with Lucky Strike in the first season. And it worked, that pitch. So it's amazing that in this sense, the pitch doesn't even get to happen because it's showing the reality of how that doesn't always work out, right? And so I love it because the Lucky Strike thing, remember, he's like, it's toasted. He's like, oh, don't even talk, just change the conversation. Don't even talk about like what's going on and like what, you know, is the problem is. Don't confront the problem. It's kind of his parenting style too with Bobby. He's just kind of, he's treating it, he's just kind of trying to ignore it and like hope that it goes away.
But yeah, I mean, even diving deeper into that, I think it's like, well, you mentioned it's like the three characters here, the three Sundays as it were, are, you know, we have Peggy, who is the new upstart, a woman who is just trying to start her life, trying to forge her own path in this workplace, you know, kind of progress in a way that women traditionally in that workplace have not been able to excel, but she is kind of caught between the expectations of her gender and her family, and also the fact that she is a mother, albeit a reluctant one, and, you know, kind of forging that, you know, she isn't really someone who I take as being particularly religious, but like I said, she has, you know, that inherent Catholic guilt, and she wants to be there for her family and subsequently her son. And then you have Don, who is, you know, struggling with his own, he's not quite middle-aged yet, but I mean, he is definitely feeling the weight of age at this point, like someone who is...
he's older than his father was when his
older
father
than his
died.
father was, yeah, certainly. And, you know, someone who is having sort of a crisis of faith of his own as far as like what he stands for and who he believes in and like what he values at this point, and also like where he stands with his relationship with his wife and kids. And then you have Roger, who is you know, certainly much more set in his ways in a traditional sense. Like he's, you know, established in the workplace. He has, you know, wife and kids of his own. We see them at the beginning, and he certainly seems to be very reluctant to his daughter's is it fiance or husband? I forget exactly.
Fiance.
Okay. So clearly not really interested in developing a deep and lasting relationship with him. And he is kind of bucking that tradition by having this new mistress or a sex worker. I was going to mention, because I'm glad you brought it up, because like you just said, you have Donna and Peggy who are sort of trying to reinvent themselves for the future and ignore the past and sort of move on from that and not feel guilty about things that happened to them. But then you have Roger, who's obsessed with the past throughout this episode. He, you know, the pitch that or after the pitch that doesn't get to really happen, that we don't really see, he talks about how, you know, he wants to feel young again. That's been his character this whole time. It's about the thrill of the chase, right? Right. Well, he also doesn't know if he has much of a future because of his health too. Like he doesn't know.
Exactly. Yeah. He's chasing the past by chasing something new, right? He is trying to recapture the past through the new. So it's not even that he has like a different philosophy from Don and Peggy. It's more of like how it's so funny because it's the line of thinking that where he's had the most conflict with Don. When we look at the pitches and we look at them dropping Mohawk for American Airlines, why Don was so against that, because Don is somebody who is just more, I think, superficially loyal to Don. He wouldn't leave Betty for somebody new. He doesn't think, right? He would stay with Betty, stay with Mohawk because it's a reliable, sure thing, but he would try to have his cake and eat it too by like finding other ways. Like, that's a different part of my identity that has the affairs. Whereas Roger is just weirdly enough, Roger has too much integrity for that. For Roger, it's about the thrill of the chase, and he is willing to leave, the safe, sure thing.
Right.
Because he wants things to be like they were when he was younger, and he could just sort of like, seduce, like a new client or go for it, even if it fails. And he's such a privileged person. He has so much money, he can afford the risk of it.
I mean, literally, she is seducing a client with him because it's a business transaction,
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's also an element of that I find quite fitting and quite interesting.
Is that, and by the way, I wrote this down because I was like, I've always wondered why Ken was being paid more. We saw in The Benefactor. Mm-hmm. And again, it's so nice to just kind of take a little bit of break between episodes. Do you think it's the escort thing? Do you think like the fact that he has so many like connections to the escort industry, like he says here, like, oh, I have a lot of numbers, and I wonder if that has something to do with his perceived value to the
You're
company?
saying like he might be aware of the dirty work that kind of goes into the client, the stuff that's kind of off the books that needs to get taken care of, that's not going to be advertised, no pun intended, with business transactions. It's possible.
Yeah, because I mean, that was the thing that Sal said to Harry Crane. It's like, what do you bring to the company that like other people can't? Like, what's the value, And I can see with Ken, that's the main thing that we see as a skill set relevant to Sterling Cooper. Because the only other skill set he shows is like being a writer, on his off time, which doesn't really affect anything at Sterling Coop. So yeah, I mean, that's my pet theory for now.
It's possible in the sense, certainly, that of the employees, with the exception of Sal, who I think is a doll, I think Ken is much more personable and able to kind of swoon clients in a way that I feel like the other employees are just person. Yeah, he's a people person in a way that, certainly Pete tries to be a people person. I don't think he's quite the suave man that he wants to be, and certainly sometimes not the man he thinks he is. But and obviously the other employees are kind of not quite socially adept, as it were. So it's possible. It's something I didn't think about. It's an interesting point, though.
I related so much to the Sunday where they all have to come into work and they spend the whole day there obsessing over something. You've been through that kind of thing? Well,
I was gonna say, I mean, I texted you. I said incredible fits, and you fittingly showing your age was like, "What's a fit?" And it's like, "Oh, John." The generation, I mean, we're not that far in age, but I felt like that was a moment where, you seem like a dinosaur and I'm a young buck. Like, John, let me tell you about the ways of the kids these days. It's fit means outfit. It's, clothes. It's a nice fit. Got some incredible fits in this episode. And I love that.
How can they be based? How can they? It's a base.
John, don't embarrass yourself base? Right now. No.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of their outfits. That's just fun. That was like a little treat for us, right? Seeing everybody's weekend attire, and
very fun reveal with obviously Pete sitting down in the conference room, gets up, and then obviously was first. Honestly, for a moment, I thought he wasn't wearing pants. So, and then obviously he's wearing like the old-fashioned short shorts.
Doc, have you seen my pants?
Yeah, honey, where's my pants?
There's a bit more Duck in this episode, not like that, but certainly we get to see a little bit more how he operates, right? Like he was a little bit more like working the room a bit, kind of working people to his favor. Certainly that little conniving side of his was a bit more on display, particularly with how he's just sort of like, oh, thanks for getting Cooper out of the room. Like that very, very telling moment for his character, if you think.
Yeah.
But
What do you think was
Did I tell you
what
Yeah.
do you think was running through his mind when Don abruptly hung up the phone on him when Bobby burnt himself? He was just like, "Oh, like, do you think he was like offended? He's like, oh, like he's going to work so much faster than I anticipated."
No, I doubt that.
Okay.
It was probably more of just like, that son of a bitch.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby Draper, he's having a tough time this episode.
This season, I mean,
acting out.
I mean, yeah, because we didn't really talk about it. I mean, we touched on it, but last week, Betty was none too pleased with Bobby because he had that George Washington portrait that was allegedly traced. We never actually found out for sure if that was actually traced or if that was just Betty assuming.
That's how
as
life
such,
is, isn't it? It's like, how do you know?
But clearly, Betty and Bobby are not on the best of terms at the moment,
and it's tough for Betty because she sees so much of Don and in Bobby's behavior, the lying, the causing trouble.
Yes.
And then Don also sees himself in Bobby and is, certainly like, you can just see that the affection he has for Bobby is so clear, especially in the way that it differs from his affection for Sally. Like he ignores Sally left and right.
I was going to say, do you think Don sees Betty and Sally?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Particularly in how he doesn't want Sally in his office. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
He's like, send her to Francine's.
Yeah.
Francine being like Betty's close friend. Yeah.
Adorable moments with Sally in the office. I love the you have what did she say to Joan? Like, you've got big ones.
I'll have big ones too when I get.
I hope I have big ones when I'm old. Yeah.
Yeah, this is I think I texted you while you were watching. I was like, get ready for some premium Sally Draper content.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand what that meant at the time, but yeah, that was certainly there was certainly some fun. Yeah,
she's precocious as all hell in this episode.
Yeah,
and she, you know what?
Yeah,
she gets drunk, has a great time.
Oh yeah, yeah. Not a shining moment for the parenting of Dawn and Betty, though. I say that.
Yeah, or the babysitting of Joan.
Yeah, babysitting. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, Bobby actually gets a nice heart-to-heart with Dawn for the first time since that weird bed interlude.
Well, not just Bobby Draper, but Bobby Barrett too.
Yeah.
That still weirds me out. They have the same name.
Yeah.
Something weird about that, but that's true. They do.
Yeah.
They do have a heart-to-heart. Yeah.
For the first time since discussing Fireflies or whatever it was in season 1, they actually get to talk a little bit, father to son, man to man, man to boy.
I like to think of this episode as a kind of a sequel to Hobo Code because it certainly calls upon that episode a lot, particularly the way that he has that conversation with Bobby and Bobby Draper, to be clear, and how he tells him, he's like, I'll never lie, like ask me any question. And we sort of see that paying off here where he asks his dad a ton of questions, and like Don is clearly not like in the right headspace to like deal with his son, because like he won't even deal with his son when he's in a good mood. But he rises above that.
I was gonna say he seems appreciative though. Like he kind of likes that someone's actually asking about his father, and like in that he's like actually kind of earnestly like searching for like, what was my dad's favorite food? It was like ham and those little candies with the beautiful purple and yellow wrapping or whatever he says.
Yeah, he surprises himself because it's not something that he thinks he wants to talk about. But I think that's why the bow on his part of the episode ends the way it does with Betty's, kind of like almost kind of motherly, like embracing him and him sort of seeing maybe for the first time in a while that when he's honest about his past and he shares that with her, that provides, I think, the intimacy he doesn't even know that he wants. I think he just views the relationship he has with Betty as just so functional, as so robotic and sterile. Like it just needs to be like it is at the beginning of the episode where they're sitting around drinking cocktails and, morning sex and stuff like that, instead of like the real stuff that happens in the very end.
I don't know, but you say that, but I feel like their first scene together is one of the more genuinely romantic scenes with Betty and Dawn. Like they're like,
it's just, I find it romantic in a whimsical way, but it's surface level, isn't it? It's more about like chemicals and like, both of them being turned on and horny. It's not about like the real intimacy, like where he's getting like an emotional like satisfaction from that relationship and vice versa. Because the whole episode, she's so frustrated with him because he just won't communicate with her. and she's trying to air her grievances to him, and he just won't acknowledge it. But when he finally talks to her about it, it's like, this is why I am the way I am with Bobby, and he has a reason for it. But that is when she finally sort of connects with him and starts to understand. That's why I think that is way more like, that's real intimacy to me.
I mean, the bookends of it certainly, I think, have the romanticism. But I guess for me, like coming into it, like the last episode, we have that moment with them in the car. Betty's crying. They actually have a genuine heart-to-heart that's reminiscent of the scene from season 1 where they're in the car together, kind of having like a swooning romantic moment in their car. And then I'm assuming this is like the day after, right, from that meeting with or is it the day? I don't know. They said they were drunk.
No, I don't think it's.
Okay, maybe
I don't think it's the day after. Well, it's a Sunday, so and they had the dinner for Lutesh on a Monday.
Okay,
so it's been at least a week.
Yeah,
we do get the sense though that they are hungover from something that they did the night before. Date night.
Yeah,
maybe he finally took her to Lutesh, which is the hottest spot in all of Manhattan.
But it does seem like at the beginning that they are kind of more lovey-dovey than they have been throughout most of the series thus far.
Yeah,
and even
I think
to
the
point where
is that only gets you so far.
I guess, but I feel like the fact that they're like pushing against doing like that, like if I feel like if it was more robotic, they would have just gone with the what was it they were going to do with Francine, like the cookout or something,
the
like barbecue. Like I feel like that would have been more robotic for him, like we saw in the 3rd episode, Marriage Figaro, where he's just kind of like going through the motions and eventually leaving the party. The fact that he actually wants to like have sex with his wife, like
I'm
really
not saying that's robotic.
Okay.
I'm saying the robotic part is when they're in like the den listening to the music and it's all propped up.
But I mean, like, I'm talking only that opening scene. Like, eventually, as it goes along, but there's feel like there's still like that kind of. I guess where I disagree is I think there is some bleeding over of that romanticism in that moment where they're dancing a little bit and they're having drinks and Sally's being a cute little bartender and they're kind of they can't believe the hours are going by and they're actually kind of. And in that moment before the bed breaks, they're actually like a unit. They're a family, and they're all kind of together in a way that we haven't seen before. And then obviously,
that's it. That's the point. That's the point. As soon as conflict comes in, it all breaks. Like the facade
what I mean.
breaks.
Yeah. So I agree. Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, just in a different way.
Yeah, we're just being needlessly antagonistic. Yeah. What else is new, right? Well, also too, like I think you do see some of the seeds of the conflict even in the facade, like the whole thing where. It just seems like Don is like almost resenting Betty for being nostalgic about like a Bing Crosby song that came out when she was in high school, right? And how he's just sort of like, like he doesn't want to dance. He doesn't want to like glide around in the past. He just wants to sort of relish in, the thing that's like moved them forward. But his issue is that he doesn't understand that confronting the past is helpful. It's good. It's like having a meditation and in a what's the word? Emergency. Also, I did want to bring up when they're in the den reading, the book she's reading is, like I mentioned before, Babylon Revisited, short story thing, Revisited, and it's like a S. Scott Fitzgerald thing. And again, it's smart to do these things week to week because I've never caught before that S. Scott Fitzgerald also wrote the novella A Diamond in the Ritz, which Arthur Case referenced in the last episode. So you're kind of seeing a possibly coincidental, but I doubt it, sort of a reference to not just Babylon from the first season, but also in the last episode, Betty maybe taking a little bit more to heart what Arthur was saying to her, and maybe a little bit more of a complication there. So, because Arthur was the one who brought up the Diamond in the Ritz.
Also, I mean, F. Scott Fitzgerald had a famously hot and cold relationship with his wife, Zelda Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I remember we were both there. And I certainly...
in our Midnight in Paris moment where we went back in time and shared a few drinks with Zelda and F. Scott.
Speaking of hot and cold relationships, Peggy and Father Gil. Will they, won't they, could they, should they?
Yeah, as we I think both agreed, it is the OG hot priest scenario. Though I feel weird saying that about Colin Hanks. Like, nothing against him. Like, I think he's a charming man, but I feel like there's something always sort of boyish about him in a way that, like, I always think of him as just like, it is Tom Hanks' son. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't think it's boyish to me. I see him as sort of the, the older responsible son in the prodigal son parable, which I think is a clear thing, a clear connection to Anita. But
is this me reading too much into it that like a famous son is playing this part?
No, I think that is 100% because he was. I think he originally, if I'm remembering right, I think he auditioned for Arthur originally, and I think they cast him as this. And I think there was that sort of intention of feeling like, yeah, this is a role that really suits his strengths, and I think does kind of tie in thematically. He's a little bit of a Jesus, but and you also see like hanging out with the sinners and the tax collectors. There's the whole thing where, he takes a certain interest in a bit of a Mary Magdalene, a little Peggy Olselin. Trying to rhyme that?
Sure.
But no, clearly there. Okay. So I want to hear it from you. The sexual tension.
Okay.
Do you think it's really there? Do you think it's something that the audience is putting in? Do you think there's an actual like attraction, like a sexual attraction between these two characters, one way or the other?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I feel like, and not to tie us into Cinemaholics, but we recently discussed Decision to Leave.
That's a lot of sexual tension to get into.
Sure. But we recently discussed Decision to Leave. And that's a film where I feel like I've had discussions with people about how romantic that movie is. And I feel like that is an incredibly romantic film, but other people don't look at it that way because there's very few moments of like genuine like physicality between them. You know what I mean? Like it's not like an erotic movie, but I think it's a very romantic film. And I feel like there's something
it's not deep water. It's not the opening scene of this episode with Dawn and Betty. Right?
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, there is something, it's very flirtatious. It is I certainly feel like there's a romanticism, not in the same way as with Fleabag, with Fleabag and the hot priest, where that eventually gets a little bit more hot and heavy. But there is something, like
spoilers.
Sure, I guess that show's been out for a little bit. You know what? Who hasn't watched season 2 of Fleabag? What are you doing with your life? Watch that. What's that show? It's a very good show. Great show.
I haven't watched Succession. I can't judge.
Sure. Yeah, we were talking prior to recording that I feel like John is a lot hipper to the TV scene. Like right now, I am finally catching up on White Lotus, and people are like, "Oh yeah, like how do you feel about the season?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm watching season 1. It's great, but like I don't know how." I catch up on shows very late on these things, but as it made evident by the fact that I'm doing the Mad Men right now, watching it for the first time for the most part. But in any case,
you take your time. That's all right.
Sure. Definitely really enjoy White Lotus, by the way.
Although you say that, and like we only both just watched The Sopranos for the first time this year.
Again, another example. Yeah, and I'm watching Twin Peaks right now, another show I haven't seen before until now. I'm very behind on TV, and I try to catch up when I can, but they're big commitments. But in any case, I forget where I was leading off with that, but with as far as the sexuality or the romantic sexual chemistry between the priest and Peggy, I feel like it is a very romantic. I don't see it quite as sexually, I guess, as you do. I mean, I think there's the temptation. Certainly, I think there is the inherent sort of like will they, won't they conflict there. But I see it more as very romantic. I see it as something as just like almost doomed to fail for a variety of reasons. But there is something that is, kind of romantic and swooning and understated about their meeting of the minds. Their sort of muted attraction to one another that I guess I don't see it as very sexual, obviously, but I see it as very romantic.
I think that's the thing. Things can be sexual without being explicit, and so that underlying sexual tension can certainly be like a spark and a chemistry. And you kind of see it the way that Father Gill doesn't judge or look down on her for her Madison Avenue talents, but instead finds them interesting and asks for her help and humbles himself before Peggy in a way that I think charms her. Yeah. Because, that's not something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I mean, if I doubt protest not too much, I feel like, him as a priest is an ad man himself for the Lord. Like he is advertising God. He is his own little pitch meetings, selling the virtues and values of Christ. And I think he sees in Peggy a kind of similarity. You think that's too broad a reach?
It's not a reach necessarily. Like it's certainly a thematic parallel, but I find it hard to really go that far into it because I think that there is a sort of commitment or deference that he has to religion that is starkly different from what advertising represents to these characters. But I think it is okay to say that there are echoes and parallels of similarities.
I mean. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm talking about the parallels because like.
Yeah.
I feel like, this episode is really stressing upon like how I think Peggy's unable to fully branch off the work and home life. I think there's something that she either knowingly or unknowingly cannot really connect with her family, and that's certainly a grave issue for her sister.
Well, what's tough for her is that she can't get a clean break from her family. She relies on them to take care of her child.
Right.
And obviously there's a ton of guilt around that for a variety of reasons.
Especially Catholic.
Exactly. And but the fact that she has to go to church, like she's doing it because she's kind of in the tank for them at this moment. Yeah, it's obligation. It's heavy.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that, to me, so they originally did plan to have like an actual out and out relationship between these two characters, kind of similar to Fleabag. However, they originally moved away from it. And I think what the ultimate reasoning behind the decision was that it was just more realistic. And it was something that was a little bit more true to life to how these things play out. Now, I know I'm kind of giving away something, but I don't think that you're going to be surprised to hear that there's not like a relationship between these two characters later in the season. I won't even confirm either way if he shows up again.
I wouldn't say that would be a shock having seen the end of the episode.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I feel okay about it. But yeah.
Giving an egg, just like Peggy, an egg child, you get my drift.
Well, also the idea of like a rebirth.
Sure.
Being born again. That second chance. And, there's a lot about their dynamic that is so interesting to me, particularly with how Anita sort of sees what's happening. And so Anita being the younger sister and seeing that like Peggy is being sort of catered to and rewarded, similar to how the secretaries are looking down on Peggy in the workplace because she's getting all this stuff that they don't get. And with her sister, it's a little bit more sympathetic because her sister sees herself as like a good Catholic and like she's followed the rules, but everyone seems to like dote on Peggy. And it's a tale as old as the New Testament, but it goes all the way back to Cain and Abel, doesn't it? So Old Testament too. But I think what's interesting about the way the show frames this is Anita, and I'm curious if you take this the same way. Some people might watch this episode and they see Anita's confession to Father Gil and just think that she's being genuine, that she's like genuinely upset about this and she's confessing it to get it off her chest and to be contrite. I see it as purposeful sabotage. I see it as like she's telling Father Gil this because she sees what's happening, either like nervous about like some kind of like relationship forming, or the fact that she wants to hurt Peggy. Like she wants to actually do something bad to like make Peggy, learn a lesson. You know what I mean? Like I think she's actually being malicious and doing this on purpose. And the tears that she's shedding in confession are her guilt because she knows it's wrong. And like, especially when he even mentions like, you're stronger than she is. I think she knows in that moment she's not, because she is so weak that she is going to hurt her little sister who, I think she does struggle to admit that she loves her sister in that moment, but she's doing what she's doing because she wants Father Gil to know, basically in her eyes that Peggy's a piece of shit. What do you think? Is that way off?
I think that's,
I'm not the Catholic, so I don't know if that's like
No, I think that's exactly correct as far as my reading and understanding of that scene. Because I think it is fairly twofold. I think going into the confession booth, I think she had fairly malicious intent, kind of weighting her own sins to her sister and kind of like trying, knowingly, imparting this information onto the priest. But yeah, those tears that fall, I think, are genuine sort of Catholic and emotional guilt that, she kind of realizes what she's done in the moment. I don't think she regrets it necessarily, but I think she is, someone who, is kind of torn between wanting the best for her sister, but also wanting the best for herself and feeling some sort of tinge and jealousy.
She wants to take Peggy down a peg.
Yeah, there you go. You did it. Congratulations.
I would have killed that pitch to American Airlines. Oh man, I feel so bad about the American Airlines thing. Oh yeah, but real quick though, I do think sorry, go ahead. So the way that Peggy relates to Father Gil too, I think, is like how she relates to God, and sort of like thinking that she can avoid the issue, like she can like sort of pursue a sort of connection with him, even outside of the sexual stuff, but like way more along the lines of like a religious sort of connection that is like removed from the sins of her past, which obviously doesn't really work for religion in that context. But I do think that she also sees Father Gil as like God, and there's like a little bit of a there's something there. I think that's all I was gonna say.
I think that is very true.
Sorry, you were gonna say something. I assume it had something to do with how much you like Grin and Barrett as a concept.
No, I actually kind of forgot about that scene, to be honest.
It's one of the weakest. I think probably the weakest in the whole episode. I don't think it's particularly notable.
It just feels very kind of disposable in the scheme of things. Yeah. Like I don't know. I think there's so much.
She's still in the show, folks.
Yeah, it feels a little obligatory, much like Peggy going to mass. But yeah, I mean, I was gonna say that boardroom scene where they're getting ready for the
Last Supper.
Yeah. No, I love how meticulously they're framed, and that like they're all kind of portraitly, and it's very like everything is so carefully choreographed with their different poses and their outfits. And then just as soon as it's revealed by Duck that they're
Shell basically been fired.
That they're delivering, as Dawn notes, a stillborn baby. I love that, like they're still kind of orderly, but
right in front of Peggy. Sorry.
Well, I mean, he doesn't know about that. But I was gonna say, I mean, like they're still kind of organized, but you can see the ruffling. Like Dawn's like messing with his cuffs, and everyone's kind of like they're no longer like a unit now. That everyone's just kind of unfurled, and they're just kind of like, oh, we don't have to really knock it out of the park anymore. We're just kind of doing this out of obligation.
Mm-hmm. As a courtesy, it really is. Oh, that's tough. Having to do something that you have to do, even though it's not going to work, and all that effort. Oh, there's a lot of emotions there.
I was gonna say, have you been in a similar scenario work-wise as this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
pitching work that is not going to. Yeah, and that you've spent a lot of time on. Definitely not in this exact same thing where it was like, oh, at the expense of something that was a client or anything like that. I haven't dealt with that before, but because I've only done in-house work.
Yeah, I love this little moment with Sal where he like is so fresh off the presses with that portrait that he's still wafting it, like making sure it's all, it adds to the sadness of how meaningless this pitch will eventually be. But just Sal, he's just a hard worker, man. He doesn't get enough credit in that office. I think I stick up for my man Sal. He's doing good work.
He sticks up for himself in this episode.
Yeah, a little bit.
When Don is just like, we're gonna do this and this, like he basically scraps everything. He's just like, Sal is the only one. He's like, what does that mean?
Right.
I love it.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Great episode of the show. I really dig it. I just the way that like all the religious themes tie in, and it just, yes, there is a hair out of place with the Bobby Barrett thing, and it does very little. I think maybe a listener will write us on that, and be like, hey, actually, no, here's where it actually does fit in. The fact that Don doesn't go to church, I don't know, it'd be something random.
You see, it's his troubled relationship with Bobby.
Bobby, that's a weird, like a newsie in 1920s New York. Like,
I don't know. That's just a weird. I don't know. I don't think that's deliberate. I think that, I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know the mind of Matthew Weiner.
I don't know either. But that's the episode. I think we really covered. I mean, we didn't cover all the Sally stuff. The way she claps at Dawn, that she gets to go to the office with him.
I love when she puts the hat on
with Paul.
When Dawn comes home from work and Sally just puts a little hat on.
Yeah. You.
Yeah.
Her conversation with Paul is so awkward. It's like, that was cute, is that your maid?
That part was pretty awkward. Yeah. I like that Paul is.
Like, do you lay on top of her?
You are correct. That is a pretty awkward exchange. I gotta say, I haven't had a chance to say this. I'm really digging the beard for Paul. I think it's a good addition to his face.
He's the opposite of Ben Shapiro in that respect, at least.
Sure,
he knows how to do a beard.
Or most right wing people, when they try to grow beards, traditionally, I feel it doesn't really work out. Making a broad generalization there, but
I won't get into that. But I certainly think that it's working for Paul. He should keep it. But
wait, does Shapiro still have that beard? I thought he got rid of that.
He shaved it. Yeah, he wised up. He was like, you know what?
For once, he wised up.
That's about all I got, though. I mean, it's a devastating blow to Dawn. To lose Mohawk and to lose American. Roger doesn't seem perturbed by it because, again, to him, the stakes aren't as high. Things between Don and Duck are obviously going to still be pretty heated because, like, Don doesn't say it to his face, but he's just like, you're supposed to bring in new business, not lose old business. It's clearly some lingering tension between those two characters is going to move forward. And the thing with Roger too, I think is pretty cut and dry with his affair. With what was her? I forget her name, but the mistress
was it
who was
Vicky?
Vicky, okay,
I think.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's her? Katie from Wet Hot American Summer.
Wet Hot American Summer, Life as You Know It, a few other things.
Life as You Know It. Is that the Katherine Heigl movie?
No, there was a show called Life as We Know It before the movie Life as We Know It. Totally different and unrelated, but she was like a teacher. I was like, man, you are behind on TV. She was like a teacher having an affair with a student,
Oh, like a
Kate
teacher?
Mara. Yeah, it was before a teacher came out, actually.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Teachers have been doing this for a while and they must be stopped.
Yeesh. Yeah. Gross.
Maybe that's what we'll do after Mad Men.
What?
A teacher, the show. Men.
Oh. Jesus Christ. I thought you were going much darker than that. I was like, John, what the hell are you doing?
try to slander me left and right. Okay, that'll do it, I think, for this episode.
No, we aren't going to end on that note. Come on. That is highly inappropriate.
Oh, yeah, we do have trivia.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I forgot about trivia. Okay.
I'll have too much Catholic guilt of my own if we ended on that note.
We'll do some trivia for the little ones. All right. So here's something. Both John Hamm and John Slattery, so Don Draper and Roger Sterling, they both had colds. The Johns. But John Hamm has no H because he's like me, a John with class.
Yeah, I always try to stick up for you when people misspell your name. I'm like, that's John without an H, you jerk.
You bitch. But no, they both had colds during the shooting of this episode. You can kind of tell, actually. So in the season 2... Yeah, I know, right? In the commentary track for season 2, Matthew Weiner said that it actually kind of helped in the episode because there's more of a vulnerability to both of them that you can kind of pick up on because they're literally sick. Now, obviously,
I was going to mention that because we didn't really talk about it last week, but Don does probably one of the most despicable things he's done, which is potentially sexually assault to Bobby. Like he fingers her,
and in this episode, he pushes Betty. After she pushes him.
But that too. But I was going to say, I just found it so surprising that, like, Don's, at one of his worst towards the end of last week's episode. And this one, I find it kind of fascinating. They make him a lot more vulnerable. Like, they talk about his history of abuse. They see him as more childlike. I don't know. I just, the complexity of the show, I do really appreciate that.
Yeah.
That they're willing to, be hot and cold, as far as, like, making him detestable in one moment, sympathetic in the next. So,
they're human beings.
Sure, exactly.
It's just not that kind of show where things are black and white. But more trivia. Okay, so Colin Hanks. So he was a huge fan of the show before being cast in the role. And it says here that he read an article in the New York Times about a show made by one of the people writing The Sopranos, and he thought the idea was interesting. And that's when he called his agent and fought to get a meeting with Matthew Weiner, who eventually said yes. And as I mentioned before, he was trying to get a different role. I believe it was Arthur Case, but I'd have to double check that. But I think it worked out. I think it was a perfect casting where they landed with him.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, generally speaking, I haven't seen, all of Colin Hanks's body of work. I mean, I'm certainly familiar with some of it, like Orange County and
Roswell,
The House Bunny. I didn't watch that. And his, I think he was quite good on Fargo. I forget if that was season 1 or season 2.
I still haven't seen Fargo. See, that's the one that I'm behind in. Huh?
Okay. Yeah, but he's quite good on that show. But I feel like, generally speaking, obviously, when, in this conversation, we keep talking about his dad. So he lives in his father's shadow. But I feel like as an actor, he generally kind of, he's been able kind of not really like mirror his father's, capabilities or, what he brings to the table. I think he's able to kind of be his own kind of actor. But I feel like he was definitely mirroring some of the cadences of Tom Hanks in his performance. I felt like it felt a lot more deliberate. Yeah. He was bringing the Hanks.
The cadence of his speaking. Yeah.
So just
like, America's Dad sort of.
Right. America's Dad.
But
Jesus Christ.
Exactly. And there's a lot in this episode too about like the sort of hotshot young priest sort of thing that was like building in popularity or more notoriety in the 1960s, to be sure. Not that we were both around for it, technically. Speaking of Father Gill again, so that one of the few location shots in this episode is when he is driving Peggy, and that's actually downtown Los Angeles, where he drops her off. And Colin Hanks has said he's really proud of that scene because he actually drove that car, which was a apparently real cool moment for him.
Yeah, I always wonder about that. Like, you know, when you get those old vintage cars, like it has to be so nerve wracking when you're driving that. I remember there was an interview with Jesse Plemons around the time The Irishman came out, because there's that scene, you know, before one of the more notable scenes in The Irishman, though I won't specify if anyone hasn't watched that, where Jesse Plemons' character is driving both Robert De Niro and Al Pacino's character. And I remember he was joking with, I think, Seth Meyers, where it's just like, if something goes wrong, and, you know, I'm responsible for the death of the two of the greatest actors in, you know, American history, you know, so definitely a nerve-wracking day on set. Yeah.
At first I was not thinking of Irishman. I was thinking of Jesse Plemons and Black Mass.
Oh,
yeah. Okay, so next thing here, also in the commentary track for season 2, Matthew Weiner said that the escort storyline with Roger is actually based on a true story. So the guys at the ad agency set up a client with a prostitute, and the higher up in the firm, Roger in this case, actually did like think that this was their wife. And so there is something kind of unbelievable about that to an extent, because we've seen this sort of escort thing happen in Mad Men already. And so I did find it a little weird that I was like, oh, isn't Roger already aware of this sort of thing? And
yeah, I mean,
that was a little odd.
I found that to be kind of odd as well. Yeah, I was kind of just like, would Roger really be that naive, or like, would he not catch on? I mean, certainly he's, you know, not the most faithful man himself. So, I mean, but then again, he did say he hasn't done this since the Navy. So, you know.
True. Well, he hasn't had to. He's such a charming guy, and that's part of the issue, isn't it? He's always just been able to, you know, have relationships with people like Joan, just more sort of like more organically, right? Or not even organically, because that's like a workplace dynamic that he clearly abuses power. But anyway, we don't have to get that far into it.
He's able to be more
seductive.
Seductive. Yes, that's a good word.
John Hamm ad-libbed the "you need to shave" from when he's talking to Sally. I already kind of mentioned that, but I do think it's always fun to see like what lines the actors ad-lib. Yeah. And it's a very Don Draper thing. He's so in touch with that character because Don Draper is like that. Like he just repeats it back to you.
Yeah, you need to shave, bitch.
Betty. I mean Sally.
Yeah.
He starts crying. Bobby burning his chin on the griddle. So sad. Cute little Bobby. It's something that Matthew Weiner also did when he was young. So another kind of true story thing there. Kiernan Shipka actually improvised in that scene where Bobby's robot like knocks something over in the table, and then after Don throws it and explodes and he and Betty leave, the part where you see Sally reach over to start cleaning it up, she was just kind of doing that. Like it wasn't even in the script.
That's cute.
She just sort of was like, we got to clean this up.
Yeah. I mean, I do. You think it's intentional, like the little robot, like Don is kind of caught in an impasse between generations, and he's like trying to forge a new future, but like so beholden to the past. Do you think it was intentional they like destroyed the robot?
I think you're no.
Okay.
I think you're overthinking it, Will Ashton.
Well, what's the point of a podcast if I can't overthink things?
I'm just joking. You could certainly take that away. And then last piece of trivia here. So the church that Peggy's family attends actually does exist in the neighborhood where Peggy says she lives, Bayview. So it's called the Holy Innocents Church. It's in the Flatbush section of Brooklyn. And I think that's really cool. That attention to detail. Now, obviously, I think they're shooting a fake version of the church, to be clear. But, you know, it's based on a real church, which I think is cool. I actually don't know for sure if they shot, maybe they did like exterior shots of the church that are real. I forget how much of that we saw in the actual episode, but
I mean, it's fitting, you know, like a history to the house of the Lord, history with these characters, history with their religion, history with their families, history.
I think you're overthinking it, Will Ashton.
Well, you know what? I think you are underthinking it.
I am known to do that. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Mad Men. I'm really hoping to have Mike back on the show next week. But you know, so he can have a confession with us. That'd be great. But until then, we'll see you all in the next Mad Men. Until then, we'll start working on the next episode. See y'all later.
See you.